Hi, this is Wendy Kendrick, and I am going to be talking to you about equity versus equality, along with the Common Core standards in K through 6, focusing on the changes that occur in the domain of geometry in Standard 1. So let's get started. So here we have a drawing commonly used in classrooms to communicate the difference between equality and equity. And so on the right, we see equity, which has 3 students, each able to see over the fence, but they need different forms of assistance in order to do so, to see the same thing. Where on the left, they are all given the same boxes to stand on. However, the person on the right is still at a disadvantage because they're still not able to see, while the person on the left has the box but doesn't even need the box. So this is a really great picture explaining it. So let's look further. So equity in education. Equity in education means giving students the opportunity to achieve equal outcomes by being aware and sensitive to their differences individually. So some students may need assistance with a calculator. Some students may need assistance with a blocks or other manipulatives. While equality in education means giving all students access to the same material, resources, curriculum, and technology. So we look at individual differences that could require somebody to need more equity, a leg up, some assistance, an accommodation, a modification. So there's disabilities that make some math more difficult for some students. There's also differences in culture that alter math, language for some students, where they're used to hearing something a certain way and we say it a different way in our American education, and they may understand what they're doing, but they don't understand the way that we're explaining it. And then there's also giftedness that requires some students to be given more challenging math or push them forward to excel better. And then we've got accommodations and modifications. So let me give you a couple of examples. I have a student who has a severe deficit in her short-term memory. In reading through the common blocks that students with disabilities have, she definitely has difficulty keeping numbers and information in her memory. She has difficulty pulling it up and retaining it. No matter how much she goes over her flashcards, she cannot remember her multiplication problems beyond anything plus 1, or anything times 1. It's just part of her disability. While my other students without this disability can memorize their times tables and build upon that as we progress through higher level math, she just cannot. She needs a tool to allow her learning of higher level math to be equitable to the other students. Otherwise, she gets stuck on multiplication and misses understanding the how and the why of solving for area and volume in parallelograms and quadrilaterals. Therefore, the use of a multiplication chart and calculator for her has been written into her IEP. She needed that accommodation. Then I have another example, looking at math manipulatives and tools, where that's helped a student and allowed her learning to be more equitable to her peers. She's in 2nd grade and she's completely hung up on the number line and base 10 solutions. She also has a very low IQ and continues to struggle with identifying what numbers are greater than or less than other numbers, as well as identifying 3 plus 2 being the same as 2 plus 3 and so forth. When I provide her with a visual manipulative, particularly blocks she can split apart and visually see, she's able to formulate the correct answer. Or if she uses a number line to find the sum of or a difference of two numbers, she can figure out that answer. But without those tools, she gets stuck and she gets frustrated and we lose her. Her ability to utilize these tools is helping her connect knowledge to the bigger mathematical concepts. This is equitable for her, considering the modifications she needs to keep building on math knowledge and keep up with her classmates. These are just some ways I already create equity and equality among my students. Shifting gears, let's look at Common Core math standards. When we do, we see there are 11 domains that focus on critical content areas. These domains have standards within them that are meant to be built upon from K through 8th grade. Geometry is one domain that is introduced in kindergarten, but it's built upon each year for students. If any of the components of this standard are skipped during the K through 8 grades, a student would be at a deficit, operating at a deficit. They wouldn't be able to build upon the information they need to. So let's go ahead and look at standard number 1 in the domain of geometry. And let's look at it at the 6th grade level. So we start back at kindergarten and see how that standard needs to be built upon each year in order for them to really grasp and accomplish this standard in 6th grade. So the 6th grade standard is that they would be able to solve real world and mathematical problems involving area, surface area, and volume. And the standard itself is number 1, find the area of right triangles and other triangles, special quadrilaterals, and polygons by composing rectangles or decomposing into triangles and other shapes. Apply these techniques in the context of solving real world and mathematical problems. So let's look at the geometry standard number 1, and let's start at kindergarten and work our way through. In kindergarten, they need to be able to describe objects in the environment using names of shapes. So they've got to identify triangles, circles, and squares. In 1st grade, they need to distinguish between defining attributes of those shapes. So they need to know that circles are round, triangles have 3 sides, squares have 4 sides. In addition, there's a standard 2 component that does help standard 1, and that's present in 1st grade. And so that is where students have to be able to compose 2-dimensional shapes. So they have to be able to draw a rectangle, draw a square, and draw a triangle. In grade 2, they need to be able to recognize and draw shapes having specified attributes. So before, where they were drawing triangles, they have to be able to identify those triangles and draw them, or be given instruction and told there's a shape that has 3 sides, connect them all together at points. They need to be able to figure out that that's a triangle. That's a goal in 2nd grade. Moving on to 3rd grade, we see standard 1 as the students needing to understand that shapes in different categories may share attributes, and those shared attributes can define a larger category. So they need to be able to recognize that rhombuses and rectangles may share a commonality, which is having 4 sides, but they also share a larger category, is that they fall under quadrilaterals. And then in 4th grade, we see students need to learn to draw points, lines, line segments, rays, angles, perpendicular and parallel lines. This is much different than shapes. They're doing a lot of plotting in this. So it appears that the standard is different, but it's not, because then they move on and I have to identify that these lines, points, parallel lines, etc., in 2-dimensional figures, which is still part of their 6th grade standard goal. And then in addition, 4th grade, they have standard 2, which also helps them in their 6th grade standard 1 to recognize right triangles and identify them. In 5th grade, Standard 1 is much different than what they've been doing. However, because it's graphing and points on a plane, but it is solving real world and mathematical problems. However, the Standard 3 really lends to them moving forward into that 6th grade standard, because it's helping them to understand that attributes belonging to a category of two-dimensional figures also belong to all subcategories of that figure. So that's, for example, all rectangles have 4 right angles and squares are rectangles, so all squares have 4 right angles. So all of these are very important. So as you can see, it's extremely important that a standard is followed by each teacher, that they're making sure that their grade level is grasping the standard for that grade level, so that the teacher the next year doesn't have to reteach or isn't teaching at a deficit. The kids need it. Thank you so much. Here's my reference.